At this point in time, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Jeff Wray, and he'll get into some more details of being a correctional officer.
Thank you, Gary. Always appreciated working with Gary. He was, when I was the assistant watch commander at Clinton, he was the watch commander and one of the most professional individuals I've ever worked with, and you could trust him. You could trust him. He had your back. He wasn't going to do something stupid. He wasn't going to do something to save himself and push you in front of the bus. And that's a big part of corrections, working with people that you can trust. I want to go through some stuff really fast today. Before I get started, I want to tell you about a couple friends of mine. I'll tell you about Bubba and Leroy. Well, Bubba and Leroy are just good old boys, and they're down south. They love to hunt and fish and get out in the woods. They're out in the woods one day, and they're walking through the forest, and they came around the corner, and there's a big old hole in the ground. Wow, whoa. Took a walk over and looked down in the hole, and wow, that's deep. So good old boys, when they see something like that, and probably you do too, I would, they lean over there, and then they spit down in the hole. And then they listen. See, when the spit hits, they can tell how deep the hole is. Well, they didn't hear anything. Wow, this is a deep hole. So they looked around, and over here was a transmission, an old auto transmission, and so they went over and they lugged that transmission over. They threw the transmission over in the hole. I figured, well, we hear something hit down there now. So they're standing there and they're listening. All of a sudden, over in the bushes, they hear this scraping, scrubbing, and all of a sudden, this white goat comes out of the bushes, charging at them, turning and kicking up dirt all over the place, and boom! Right down the hole. Buffa said, "Do you ever see anything like that?" Leroy said, "I've never seen nothing like that in my life." So they're standing there thinking about it. All of a sudden, this farmer comes walking through the brush there, and he's going, "Wow," he said. "You know," he said, "I'm looking for my goat." He said, "I got a crazy old goat up here." He said, "You can't do nothing with him. God put him someplace where you can eat and keep track of him and everything." And so he said, "I don't know, I know he's got to be around here." He said, "I have him tied to an old transmission." So, unfortunate for the goat. Now I'm going to do something else. Hold on a minute. I want you to know who I am. I want you to understand this. You're going to do what I say. You're going to do it when I say it. And I'm not going to take any guff about it. Listen, I'm not going to get even with you if you don't do it. I'm going to get so far ahead of you, you aren't even going to ever want to mess with me again. You see, that's the two sides of the life of a correctional officer. If he's not in control, if he's not in charge, if you're not going to do what he says, I mean, look at how many there are of you and how many there are of me. I've got to make you do what I want you to do. And I've got to find a way to do it. I want to have a good time. Like Gary said, we want to laugh, we want to joke, we want to do a lot of things that help us sometimes forget exactly what we're doing, because sometimes it's not very pretty. But there's the reality of the dangerous people that we're dealing with. See, to try to explain to you in a matter of a few minutes exactly what the life of a correction officer is like, the private life, the life where he has to deal with his family, has to deal with his children, his wife, his neighbors, his relatives, very difficult. So, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to take you through some information. And then I'm going to try to stop a couple of times and provoke you to some thought. And we're going to talk about a wife or a spouse, and I put spouse there because 25% of correction officers nowadays, nationally, are women. So sometimes the spouse is a husband. The children and the relatives in particular. And this story is really a story of from a smile to a frown. From a joke to a really serious business of getting killers, murderers, armed robbers, rapists to do what you want them to do. And the first part of this story is going to be about going to work behind the wall. It's a process. Gary was talking about the reason that he took a job as a correction officer. That's the reason I took a job as a correction officer. Because there was going to be money involved, and retirement, and all the benefits that go with it. So you sort of get enthusiastic about it. I knew quite a bit about it. My family had been in corrections. My dad was a correction sergeant. My mom had worked as a secretary. My father-in-law was a correction officer. I had 3 brother-in-laws who were correction officers. I got 2 uncles who were in corrections and cousins who were correction officers. So it was the industry in Dannemora in those days. And there's a degree of excitement. You go through the academy, you get geared up, you got yourself ready to go to work, and it's going to be a career. It is a career. And now you've got a career. So you're in a position to raise a family, to build a house, to go on with your life. And so you're excited. You know, you're on time, you're ready to do, you got your uniform all set, and you know, this is going to be, it's going to be a good job. Things are going to be good. Then you start to realize some of the realities that go with the paycheck. You start to realize that there's going to be brutality. Now, some people aren't used to that. Some people are. Some people, you know, grew up with a bunch of brothers or something, and they rolled around and fought, and so they're used to that. Some people aren't. But the brutality sort of takes you a little bit by surprise, because with brothers and stuff, there's no that it's like you fight with your brother, somebody comes along and wants to fight with him. Now you and your brother are on the same team. So it's not the same kind of a thing when you're dealing with the brutality between inmates who are seriously trying to hurt each other. There's blood. Blood is a real problem. Blood carries so many pathogens nowadays, not so much when I started. We didn't think about it then, but now correction officers carry the rubber gloves like medical people, and every time you have blood, you have an issue, because you could be taking something home to your wife and children. Slashings, very violent. One of the things that happens inside a prison is you have inmates who give information to the administration, and other inmates find out about it. What they do is they cut the inmate that tells from their ear to their mouth. Literally open it up so that he can put his tongue through it. And when the scar heals, there's a scar there for life, he's marked. Every inmate in every jail you'll ever go to knows what he's done, or at least what he was charged with doing. The gangs are, we could spend the whole morning on gangs. I'll just tell you this quickly. Suppose you're in prison and you don't want to be in a gang. Okay, you think that that's fine. I don't want to be in a gang. You don't have a choice. If they choose you, they want you in their gang, you're going to be in their gang, or you're going to pay a dear, dear price for it. What they'll do is they'll take an envelope and they'll put a homemade weapon in it, little note, and it'll say, you use this on that inmate over there, or we'll take it away from you and use it on you. Boy, that's not much of a choice. And as soon as you do that, you're in the game. So that mentality, that's not something that we see on the street. So we're dealing with a mentality that's different, and it's stark, and it's shocking. The violence, there's violence all through it. Death, you could be standing there 1 minute and there's going to be a dead person right next to you. No, I've never dealt with a dead person on the street in my life. And probably most of our people in our communities don't. But you're going to have to deal with it in prison sooner or later. Mental illness. They closed a lot of the mental institutions. Long story, but they took people who were insane, let me get it right, insane criminals. Not the criminally insane, but insane criminals that they had separated out, put them back into the prisons. Some great programs nowadays where they actually have developed these programs to care for them, because they can't care for themselves. They're filthy, dirty, they stink, they don't take care of their clothes, their cell's a mess. And so that's a problem to the guy that's living next door to him. And so you're dealing with, I never dealt with that on the street. coworkers, yeah. When you first get there, you realize there's some people that have been there 20 years or something, and you know they've developed some strange habits. I'll just leave it at that. The suffering. There is human suffering inside prisons, and you don't think about that. You don't think about the anguish.
Jeff, what is the difference between prison and society itself? What's the difference? Because all those bullets up there.
Yep. Scene is a person, as a correction officer, getting thrown on. That is not only disgusting, but with HIV and hepatitis, tuberculosis, all the different things, it's frightening. And they're not only frightened, but their families frightened. For months, till tests come back, they take different medications and hopefully get through it. So the result is initially that you're disillusioned. It might take longer for some people than others, and certainly everything that I speak about here today is not common to every correction officer. But I'm sure trying to give you the overall view, and each correction officer is impacted differently. So you've got a disillusioned individual, and that causes a problem. That causes a dread. They don't want to go to work. They're not going to get paid if they don't. So they have to go to work, but they don't want to go to work. This has been a brutal assault on their senses. And they're no longer really interested in doing the job, but they don't really have a lot of options. If they have a 4-year degree, they can move into a different part of corrections. They can move to a different state agency, but they've already got a retirement going. They're already invested in the system, so it makes it more difficult. One of the impacts of this dread is the officer starts to be late. He becomes cynical, you know, against society, against humanity. He becomes depressed, withdrawn, changes some patterns in his life. He becomes hypervigilant. Very, very, you don't see correction officers or police officers or anybody that's got to be vigilant. They don't get pickpocketed when they're on vacation. They don't have things like that happen to them. And you don't realize you're doing it. It's a subtle change. When I'm on vacation with my wife, and we're walking down the street in Bar Harbor, Maine or something, and all the little shops, and we're holding hands, and I'm not paying attention to which side of her I'm walking on. I'm probably walking next to the shop windows, and we're going along. I see something across the street. I see something I don't like. I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter what it is. I see an individual who's acting in a manner that has raised a warning flag. Now, I'm not going to say anything to my wife, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up to a shop window. I'm going to point something out in the shop window, and when I step back in the street, I'm going to be on this side between her and whatever's going on over there, and I'm going to watch it till I'm by it. I don't even think about it. I say, well, you know, I need to. Before I know it, I've done it. That means that I've changed. Something has changed inside me due to the job that I've done. And there's a feeling of isolation. Because all my friends that we did stuff together before I became a correction officer, they're not correction officers. So, you know, I try to explain to them what's going on, but, you know, after 1,000 words, the feelings, for some reason I can't transmit them to the other person. Then there's an alienation. It can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, maybe against the supervisor, maybe against the administration, maybe against the state, maybe against society. But you start to feel like you're alienated from the life that you used to have. You start to get a little desperate because things are spiraling out of control. You are no longer where you thought you should be, doing the things that you thought you should be doing. One of the methods used to compensate, and Gary and I were talking about this the other day, and it happens to a lot of people, is you become a little compulsive. You start to have some behavior that is going to help you deal with the situation. A ritual that will make you early for work. A ritual that has everything to do with time. Not so much on the morning shift. If you're working days, you set your alarm clock, that could be part of it. But if you're working afternoons or nights, there is a ritual that you set up, sort of subconsciously, where at a certain time, if you're going to, for example, go to work for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can't do anything after 12, or 12:30, or 1 o'clock. Each person has their own cutoff, but that's it. Anything that pushes you past that cutoff, your day's not going well. Nothing's happened. I mean, for most people, it wouldn't make a bit of difference, but now you're in a mode, a correction mode, where you have a ritual. So at 1 o'clock, you have to start getting ready. Your uniform has to be ready. Oh boy, if that shirt's not clean, wow. You think that your wife might hear about it? You think you might have something to say? You think you might start to let some of that anxiety and the stuff that's inside you come out on her? You do. You do. How do you think your spouse would react to that? I don't think that they would love it. Mine would. So, you got your uniform, everything's going good, you got your shower, you got your uniform, then you got to start sort of gear up. You got your armor on, you got your uniform on, you're going to have to get pumped up because we're going in. We're going in. You're going in the game. So you have to have a cup of coffee, get some caffeine in there, maybe some tobacco. I chew tobacco. I never chew tobacco on the street. I chew tobacco in the jail. And I could tell you so. I've already skipped over so many stories. But let me tell you this one, just to give you an idea of the mental gymnastics that occur inside a correctional facility. I was the sergeant at the Special Housing Unit in Auburn, and only been there a little while. Had an inmate, they were having a lot of trouble in that unit, and had an inmate there who was giving us a hard time, wanted to go down to sick call, he said that something terrible wrong with him, and he just wanted to get out of his cell, and probably had in the back of his mind that he was going to act up. So we're in the process of taking him down. I had nothing but the youngest officers. Nobody wanted to work up there. It was just a mess. And so they didn't have a lot of experience. And this inmate had been in the facility for a long time. So, you know, he knew how things went. And he knew these guys didn't have a lot of time. So we're going down. It was in an elevator at this particular facility. And we're going down in it. And he's starting to... So he's going to spit on somebody. Or at least he's giving you the impression that that's what he desires to do. Well, I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, this guy ain't going to spit on nobody. So, I reached in my back pocket, I took out a chew, I put it in the chew, started to chew it, spit in the wastebasket in the infirmary, looked him right square in the eye and smiled. He didn't spit on anybody. But that's the kind of people you get. And that's the kind of answer that you have to find, because you can't just grab him and slap him. You're not spit on anybody, you idiot. You can't do that. So you have to find other ways to manipulate people, and that ability trickles over into your life at home. You're right. I never was a carpooler because I was out of control. I couldn't carpool with other people because if I did, I was at their mercy. Unacceptable. Couldn't do it. In parking, if you got to the facility, I mean, everything is timed. You're looking at, if you've got to punch the clock at 1:15, you want to be there by 1:30 so that you can go to your downstairs and take care of what you got to take care of and be lined up on time. So even missing a parking place can be a problem. The result is that you try to live a lie. This job doesn't affect me. I'm just fine. I'm fine. As long as everything goes right. The opposite side of this is going home to your wife and children. Now that you've been acclimated to working in a correctional facility, dealing with people who are difficult to deal with at best, now you have to go home to your wife whom you love, and your children whom you adore. Or vice versa, or both. So you're exhausted. You're exhausted. Being hyper-vigilant at work has drained you. You don't have any more adrenaline left. In fact, you're such an adrenaline junkie that you're probably, sometimes when the shift is over, something bad has happened, you're on an adrenaline come-down kind of thing, like coming off of a drug. So you're physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. You come home, bike's in the middle of the driveway, no place for you to park your car. Next thing you know, you're treating your wife and your kids like idiots. Happens all the time. You're irritable. Very irritable. Communication. Communication is interesting, and it's one of the things that correction officers deal with differently, so differently. My friends dealt with it differently with their families than I did with mine. Some correction officers don't talk about their job at all. Play them out. Nothing to say. Don't talk about it. They hold everything in. Some talk too much. They let it all out. And then the blood is all over the place in this. Please. Your wife doesn't want to hear that. And so if you've chosen one extreme, too little, or the other extreme, too much, what happens is, that's too bad. Because now there's no communication. There's no talking. You aren't able to express at least some of your feelings, so you just stop talking at all. And then, probably one of the most dangerous ones, is you want to talk to somebody who's like you. And if you're a male correction officer, a female correction officer can be that person. If you're a state trooper, that person can be a female state trooper. I don't know what lines of business you're all in, but very often people that are having trouble communicating with their spouse about their job choose to turn to another person of the opposite gender in that job and talk to them. Very dangerous. So now you're disassociated. Your wife or your spouse and you and your children are on different tracks. They don't know where you are because you don't tell them. Then there's compartmentalization. I'm not a correction officer. That's not me. I don't do that except 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So then you get into the point where there's hobbies. Hobbies are a wonderful thing. I don't have any. I'm not saying it. But hobbies are time eaters. And we all know correction officers that have spent all their summer working every day off, working double shifts so that they can have from the end of September till the 1st of December off to go hunting. They don't, yes?
Once you retired, being a correction officer, what is the lifespan?
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll have a question and answer period after, and remind me and I'll address that.
I'm hearing like all the pitfalls.
Right.
My best friend is a correction officer, and everything that you're saying up here, he's like the total opposite. He doesn't bring it home. He leaves it at work.
Okay, well, let's look at the rest of this compartmentalization, because that could be part of what he's doing. I'm not saying it is or isn't. But the time that he has spent away from his family, working all summer, and then hunting all fall, you can't have a relationship, not a good, solid marriage relationship doing that, or a business, construction. See, there's no job satisfaction in corrections, very little. Gary had some because he was involved in the correctional emergency response team, so there was a lot of satisfaction with that because he was preparing and doing, and it wasn't just dealing with inmates. But for a lot of guys, there isn't. They turn to maybe a job as a contractor so that they can see a product of their hands. It's a natural desire to see that. But again, time robbery. Or this is a little strange, but we've we've heard of many people doing it, is they don't use the same name inside the facility as they do on the street. Maybe they use their first name at the facility, their middle name on the street, a nickname at the facility, their first name, or vice versa. So they are disassociating themselves, and in a way they're in denial about the fact that that really is their job. They're compartmentalizing it, and that's what I did. And I did not realize that I'd actually done that until these meetings started, when Gary had the intestinal fortitude to stand up and say, I'm having a problem. It took me a long time to figure out, but what I'd done was I compartmentalized my problems and pushed them away. I talked to another officer who's been retired for a while, about a month ago, and he'd come to one of our meetings. And he said, I went home and I had a dream about corrections, about the prison that night. And he said, I'm not coming back. You think he's compartmentalizing? And then there's the realization. You know, I'm not like other people. I'm not like the school teacher. I'm not like the guy that works for the public works department or works on computers. I'm not like them. I'm different. I have a different perspective. Everything's a war. Everything's a battle. It's me against you, and I've got to win. So if I don't win, I'm weak. If I don't win, I lose. If I don't win, when I go back to work, I might not be able to win there. That's not acceptable. So I have to win. I went to rent an apartment one time after I was promoted to lieutenant, and you learn to come back to some statements with a little bit of wit and sort of disarm them. And sometimes you don't realize the depth of what you're saying. But I'm talking to this guy about renting an apartment, and he said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a corrections lieutenant. He said, I don't usually deal with correction officers. I said, I don't either. And that wasn't true. That was just a smart comment. But that was the perspective that he'd had. He'd rented to correction officers, and he'd had a problem with it. Because they're very aggressive. That's the nature of the business. They have a different perception. Like I said, they're always alert. They don't get, correction officers don't get pickpocketed when they're on vacation. They don't have people mug them, because the guy's looking at them and they're walking down the street like this. I wonder what that guy's doing in that building. So the criminals see that, and they're not interested in dealing with that. They're going to find somebody that's a lot easier. And they have different needs. Big time different needs. They use alcohol as a tool to self-medicate, drugs, both legal and illegal. We've all heard about that. And they do something else. They do a little thrill seeking. Now, whether it be high-speed motorcycles or cars or maybe rock climbing without a rope on the face of a cliff, 1,000 feet up in the air. Dangerous. What would your wife think if you did that, or your husband? If you decided all of a sudden you're taking up rock climbing on the face of a cliff without a safety rope or anything, you just fall off and die. But they get a thrill out of it. It allows them to get their mind on something else, and it doesn't really take into account their family, their wives, their children. So they become, in a way, disenfranchised from society, from the norm. And everybody knows that the norm is a nasty little word that's really nobody's normal. But the general accepted normal that we talk about. So, in conclusion, the product of this is an irritable, desperate, disillusioned individual who is living a lie, is disassociated from their family, who's in denial about their true condition, and disenfranchised from anyone who could help them or support them. It's a very difficult place to be. All that starts well does not necessarily end well. Let me just read this to you. It's a little bit about a guy who's a correction officer out in Colorado. He dealt with an incident where an inmate had a 6-inch sharpened copper shank and the prisoner repeatedly stabbed this guy in the face and neck. Only the officer's glasses prevented him from losing his eye. Another guard fled. Inmates chased and cut up a third guard. They surrounded the officer for more than 3 minutes until he was rescued. They were screaming and yelling at him, "Kill him! Kill it!" the officer recalls. Well, the puncture wounds healed, but the trauma remained. Supervisors offered no counseling. The warden only asked him, "When are you going to be back to work?" He switched to a different facility where the inmates were confined 23 hours a day. And this is his statement that I want to share with you. "I can't seem to get along with anyone anymore. I can't tolerate anyone. It's like I could care less if everyone fell off the face of the earth. It seems that the only people I want close to me are my wife and my son, and they don't want to be close to me because I'm so miserable." Having an argument, takes that gun, points it right at her, and he says, I know how to take care of this." Bam! True story. True story. Now, Terry is going to share some things about health issues.